DLCs in video games have always been a controversial medium for game developers. Many people see DLCs as cash grabs or just another cog to add to a corporate portfolio to thicken people's pockets. Bethesda, for an example, has ruined many gamers' perspectives on DLCs.
People will buy anything.
Such as the likes of Horse Armor, this however later becoming a separate medium, which almost causes revolt. In-game purchases. The reason why I bring DLCs up is, although DLCs barely ever have a good rap, sometimes there's a juicy fruit in the rotten basket. In this case, being a barrel. A red barrel. The year is 2010 in the mountains of Lakeside, Colorado, where an asylum remains open after having to close previously after the owning company, under the name Murkoff, were accused of having supported a CIA project called Project 𝗃𝗀𝘀𝘁𝗄. Project 𝗃𝗀𝘀𝘁𝗄 involved the experimentation of unwitting US citizens to attempt to find a way to mind control. Murkoff, after this crisis being brought to light in the 1970s, had to close up shop to later reopen in 2009 under new experimental means under the control of an evil man called Dr. 𝗃𝗀𝘀𝘁. 𝗃𝗀𝘀𝘁 believed he could build a machine where individuals who had undergone enough horror and agony could be placed into to create a puppet with undeniable power, essentially a god, which agreed to every one of his demands. No patients were willing participants. Waylon, while on duty, has finally been pushed to his limits. His suspicions run too deep about the practices of Murkoff and this so-called morphogenic engine. So Waylon decides to email a freelance investigative journalist, or better known as Mars Upshaw. Waylon is clearly terrified of getting caught exposing the company, as you can see this just by the way he's shaking and being overly observant. You hear a voice calling for you. Apparently you're needed in the engine room to repair a malfunction. Walking through the lab towards the morphogenic engine, you can see scientists talking casually, like they, aren't torturing people for experiments.
Right. How long's it been since you've seen Jane? 3 weeks now? That's nothing.
You're serious?
Sure.
You got a girlfriend or somebody?
I'm married.
How long since you've seen her?
Honestly, I'm not even sure.
While repairing a coding malfunction, you can see a patient being dragged in, completely overcome by fear, to eventually break away from his restraints.
Help me! Don't let them do this! Don't let them... I know you can stop this! You have to help me!
The patient claims he knows we can stop this. This could be our prophecy, finally making our life meaningful and not filled with greed like the people around us. I mean, we did send an email, so surely that will get the job done. The patient is then put back into restraints and placed into the machine. Watching the machine work is awful. I think this is more than enough evidence to say Murkoff is breaking a few human rights regulations, and arguably seeing the Geneva Convention as more of a suggestion.
What's this, you fucking piece of shit?
We have to get our laptop back, so we head towards the server room where we left it. But rather than our laptop being left peacefully, it seems we've been caught by none other than Jeremy Blair.
Somebody's been telling stories outside of class. On the floor!
I'm going to give you a little bit of background to Jeremy Blair. Skip to this time if you don't want to hear about it, but I think you should. Jeremy Blair is the Executive Vice President of Global Development, the head of Mount Massive, and Project Walrider. However, his true role within Murkoff was a tad more sinister. Blair's role was to keep the dark actions of Murkoff secret, similar to that of a hen do or stag do in Vegas. But in this case, rather than gambling your pension away or getting an STI, he's keeping the fact hundreds of innocent civilians are being tortured secret. There is little known about Blair's earlier life, but what we do know is that Blair slowly worked his way up the business to eventually reach the role he is at now. What made Blair so perfect for the role would be his arrogance, greed, and evil-minded personality, meaning that he wouldn't question what he would be told to do by Murkoff, making him perfect for a corrupt, evil corporation. You get knocked down by guards, and Blair claims you're so stupid and mad for thinking a simple email could bring down Murkoff. So mad, in fact, you should be admitted into Mount Massive.
Graduated cum laude from Berkeley, but still somehow not smart enough to realize that the last thing a fly ought to do in a spider's web is wiggle. Somehow dumb enough to think that a borrowed laptop, onion router, and firewall patch would be enough to fool the world's leading supplier of biometric security. Stupid, Mr. Park. More than stupid. In fact, that was crazy. I'm afraid we're going to have you committed. Mr. Park, will you willingly submit to forced confinement? Did you hear that, Agent?
He said yes, Mr. Blair.
Great. Maybe you could administer Mr. Park here a light anesthetic.
Gladly.
You don't have to wake up, but open your eyes.
You wake up in a room with a constant streaming of what seems to be the Rorschach ink blot test playing on a big screen in front of you. A second later, after gaining consciousness, the chains which had locked you to the seat randomly go undone. Noticing that you aren't the only patient which has been unlocked, you get up out of your chair, to then suddenly lose balance, from probably being sat down for days, weeks, maybe even months, to fall over and look to your left, to see a fellow patient get picked up by a ghost-looking creature. This creature being the very creature 𝗲𝘂𝘁𝗀𝘆 and the Walrider project was trying to create with the engine. 𝗲𝘂𝘁𝘆 must have found a suitable candidate to wield the morphogenic engine. Picking up the camera from the stand gives Waylon an idea to try and record as much as he can of this asylum and hope such footage would be found on his corpse. This gives a bit of insight on Waylon's character. Clearly he's less of an optimist than Miles, as Miles from the start to pretty much the end had full confidence on his escape. But Waylon has already lost hope and believes full-heartedly he will die with the rest of the people down here from 𝗲𝘂𝘁𝘁𝘆's creature. Waylon, unlike Miles, has a family. As specified in Waylon's notes, he claims to have a wife called Lisa and 2 kids. He has significantly more to lose than Miles. A patient seeming to be having a manic episode then opens the door to your cell, allowing you to get out. Eventually you walk upon a bunch of patients messing with one of the scientists, with one of the patients mounting him. Not in a sexual way, may I add. They tell you to stop observing and join in. However, even though you have been treated poorly, you haven't been brought down to the level of anger which causes the desire to mutilate even a guilty person. You, unlike many patients, still have a conscience. Eventually walking through the lower floors of the asylum, you come to a vent system you can crawl through. In such vent system, you can eavesdrop on some security guards just chilling. The guards reveal that there is a short wave radio you can use to contact the outside world. The guards also reveal how secretive Murkoff is, as the guards are even more than willing to take the chances with the patients than have their own Nuremberg trial once the court of public opinion arrives. Waylon has accepted death, but before death, he wants to expose Murkoff for what it is. A monstrous organisation which preys on a few forgotten lunatics.
Turned us into these things because nobody cares about a few forgotten lunatics.
Walking through the lower lab areas, you come to a pleading scientist, which meets his deserved end after a press of a button.
I need to get hold of my... You're not security. I'm a patient like you. Stole these clothes from a dead body I found. You gotta get me out of here. Please, just push the button. Open the door. We can get out of here together.
He may have deserved death, but did his kids deserve the loss of a family member, even though the father worked with monsters? Waylon had just looked into the eyes of a man being beaten to death by another man. That's sure to change Waylon's psyche, whether that's good for his survival or not. The exit is just a glimpse away, but the scientists are too scared of the patients, or even maybe too disconnected to show sympathy, and they lock you inside. On the right of the exit you can find a document from Jeremy Blair, speaking of Lisa, saying that Lisa had been speaking not very charitably of the Murkoff Corporation, due to Murkoff's hospitalization of her husband. The document also claims that Jeremy told Lisa, if she felt fit to do so, to attempt to combat the diagnosis with lawyers. But Jeremy claimed that in the event of a diagnosis being found false, which we know it is, then Lisa and Waylon would be saddled with non-insignificant healthcare debts, as Waylon's insurance would be cancelled if his resignation was under false pretenses. Jeremy signs off the document claiming he takes personal gratification of dealing with Waylon and his wife. Clearly Jeremy isn't in a very good marriage and is wanting a cheeky throuple to spice up his life. This document shows how Murkoff has been able to get away with omitting staff, as they essentially tie staff in as patients, or force them and their families under immeasurable levels of crippling debt, usually leading to families accepting the diagnosis to then hope to one day reunite with their families, or maybe even forget they exist.
Increasing interest in the wide variety of recreational facilities. Patients enjoy movies.
After jumping above the surgical tent tunnel thing, you can jump back in and carry on towards the radio. On the way to the radio, you can see a man devouring a corpse with a surgical pizza cutter. This man is clearly hungry. The man is called Frank Manera, and as you can see, he is a cannibal. There's little to be found on Frank's character in the game, or even the Outlast comics. But what I was able to find out was that Frank's first patient consultation was on the 1st of November 2010, after it was found out that he had lost 73 pounds of weight from lack of eating. Frank was then later admitted into Mount Massive due to him becoming completely unresponsive, but no documents in the game answer why. Once admitted, he was a pain for the scientists, as when it came to eating, he constantly refused to eat, leading to the scientists to even consider force-feeding him. The scientists could never find a meal Frank would enjoy. Maybe the scientists should have tried human flesh, or even they could have shoved their fingers in his mouth. I bet he'd like that. After moving past Frank having a meal, you need to find the keys to a pair of handcuffs holding a corpse to the door to the crematorium. After a quick spin, jump and sprint past good old Frankie, while trying not to be eaten, you can swiftly find a security guard's corpse with the required key. Shoving such key unlocks the handcuffs and lets you carry on towards the crematorium. Now you're in a bit of a predicament, so you need to turn around, slam your shoulder against the bricks and break out. The only way out from here is up, so Waylon has to do a bit of climbing. Once at the top, you can pass through the vent to get back to the main area of the asylum. Walking through here, you can hear the return of the cannibal buzzing his weapon as you come towards patients running towards the exit. With your attempt to avoid the cannibal, you come back to a plastic medical room, similar to that at the start of the game. Following the path to the exit, you can see the decontamination chamber towards the exit is blocked by a toxic gas. So you need to find the main valve and shut it off. Near the valve you can find a document from 1957 speaking of the government research plan to use psychochemicals in political situations to influence human behaviour. This document could potentially imply such chemicals would be used to turn political candidates into puppets under the state's control. It seems this research might still be going on, and could be linked to the reason of the medical tents in the area, as the tents would likely be used to contain the psychochemicals. It's even said in the document that the autopsy reports of patients show metallic tumours, indicating heavy psychochemical usage. So unless patients in the asylum have a free range to a shit ton of psychochemical drugs like LSD, then it's likely they would be forcefully induced. The exact same thing which happened in Project MKUltra. We are aware Murkoff has had its run-ins with the CIA, and has its links with Project MKUltra, so it seems Murkoff may be carrying on the experiments the CIA had to close down in 1973. The CIA tried to destroy the evidence of Project MKUltra, but clearly the greed of the people behind it wanted the research to carry on, but under another alias, the Murkoff Corporation. Finally back at the decontamination pod, you come to some stairs, which lead you to the outside of the asylum. The fog outside is blinding, causing you to not be able to see what's directly in front of you, but still being able to hear footsteps around you. This small section of the game is very unnerving to me, as it feeds to the fear of the unknown. This very fear is notorious for being linked to many other phobias, such as its links to the fear of the ocean and its unexplored depths, the dark and not knowing what's there, and the fear of spiders and why they have so many legs. Some even argue, such as H.P. Lovecraft, that the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is the fear of the unknown. Eventually, this little wander takes you to some stairs which split two ways. Walking through the door on the left takes you to a bloke playing basketball with a human head, whereas the door on the right takes you to an underground passage to the prison courtyard. Walking through the courtyard eventually takes you to a basketball court, which instead of being thrown a ball, you're thrown a human head, which to many people being given head is a good thing, but under this circumstance it's not very pleasurable. Ignoring the basketball court takes you to a ladder, which leads you to a door inside of the prison block. Finally at the radio, you turn it on and call the police, but you are stopped by Jeremy Blair having what seems to be a temper tantrum.
Waylon Park, you couldn't just keep your mouth shut. You
couldn't just play along. But you're done talking now.
Luckily, you're saved by a man called Chris Walker. Well, being saved is a stretch, but he comes in and Jeremy runs away in fear. If you want to hear more about Chris Walker, I did a character deep dive in my last video, but anyway, carrying on. After a quick dodge and a rather long sprint, you reach a small gap in a door and slip through, getting away. Soon coming to a hole, you can jump down. You can find a document from Jeremy Blair to a Rick Traeger. Rick Traeger was once an employee in the higher echelon of Murkoff until he was caught in somewhat of a mental breakdown, which led him to being forcefully admitted into Mount Massive. Rick is a sickening man, but this document places Jeremy almost on par. The document stated that Jeremy, even after being told that the morphogenic engine caused psychosomatic pregnancies to females within its vicinity, that the possible profits of being lost by not testing on females are what he claims to be unethical to pass up on. This shows another example of sickening greed from those in charge, as it shows Jeremy only caring for that of profits over the life of humans. This needs to be exposed. Wandering through the corridors gets cut short as we are interrupted by Chris Walker once again, so we have to jump out of a window to avoid getting ripped in half. Back outside in the courtyard, this time with no fog, you walk upon an electrical grid of the asylum. You have to go through the electrical grid, so you need to turn the power off, as, you know, you don't want to get shot. This is done by running down past a man failing No Nut November and switching off the grid. However, someone thinks it's funny to turn the power back on the exact second we leave. So we gotta go back and switch off again, this time with no funny business. Once past the electrical grid, you come to a watchtower where there's conveniently a break in the bottom of the door so we can go through. To head towards the exit, we gotta go to the top of the watchtower, and at the top of the watchtower, you have to make a massive jump. Getting up from a fall, which in all honesty should have left Waylon incapacitated, you find yourself on what seems to be a maze of decrepit wooden planks. You hear two patients speaking about using you as a goat, a sacrifice even, to the man downstairs.
Talk. We need a goat. There's reason here. To bear our guilt, our gender, a small piece of flesh between us and the...
We don't want to be a sacrifice, or let alone a patient's play toy. Maybe death is the best option. Some people saw it this way. Suicides seem wise. Squeezing through two bookcases, you come to a patient hiding. The patient warns you of the man downstairs. Whoever this man is, he certainly doesn't sound like someone you want to go out with for a pint. We have to find a way out of it. Jumping over a bunch of wooden crates to get over a wall, you get seen by two patients. The very patients wanting to give you up. This chase ends up leading you to the basement. Being stuck in a dingy basement is certainly on brand for Outlast, but this isn't a normal basement. This basement has sights which would change anyone, and in this basement, we can see a direct change in Waylon. This change being documented through his notes written to Lisa, his wife. I was with you when both our boys were born. It was, until recently, the most miraculous thing I'd ever seen. Completely outside of reasonable belief, and yet somehow central to everything I've come to believe since. You always said I was too literal-minded and tried to turn everything into an if-then statement. Lately I've widened my horizons. How can the things I've seen here be? But I know the answer. Money. Profit. Things we made just because we could. This letter to Lisa from Waylon expresses the change in Waylon. Not only has the beauty of birth been shattered in his mind, but he feels a clear change in his psyche. His once literal mind has been destroyed and the events seem clear. Murkoff are only out for profit. Carrying on through what seems to be a sewing room, you walk up to a door. Once you try to open it, you get jump scared by none other than 𝘃𝗀𝘀𝘁𝗍, the very man you saw being forcefully admitted into the morphogenic engine at the start of the game. If you don't want to hear the story, skip to this time, but once again I think you should. 𝘃𝗀𝘀𝘁𝗍 is a patient who once 𝘃𝐽𝑠 set himself a home in the vocational block. 𝘃𝗀𝘀 from a very young age grew up in a leave it to beaver home, a saying derived from a TV show in the 1950s with what at the time would be seen as the perfect family. His family loved him, and he loved them. Well, only if that were true. 𝘃𝗀𝘀𝘁 came up with his story to shield himself from the outer world. His trauma from his childhood cut him deep, and he believed creating a false narrative of his childhood would mend that. 𝘃𝗀𝘀𝘁's father and uncle were evil people, and constantly abused him in despicable ways. This even became a matter of medical and public record, and 𝘃𝗀𝘀𝘁 wasn't even old enough to know it was wrong. His father and uncle were eventually incarcerated, but it was too late to stop the mental damage it caused 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆. 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆 later became a misogynistic serial killer. This led to his omission into Mount Massive. His sick mind wanted to build the perfect family through his horrible acts. He's not only incarcerated within the walls of Mount Massive, but also imprisoned in the confines of his own mind. 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆 may be a perpetrator in many circumstances, such as the women and men he mutilated before being emitted, but he was also a victim to his family, Murkoff, and himself. When he comes around to get you, all you need to do is hide, wait for him to pass, and then sprint away without him seeing you. You then come to a door blocked by a metal crate. Once through, you then have to jump to an elevator ladder to escape 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆's grasp. This ladder, however, has met its end. The fall leaves you the limp, so you start waddling in search of an exit. 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆, however, still hasn't given up on you, so you have to take refuge inside a locker. This choice was a massive mistake, as 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆 knows where you are.
A delicacy to be unwrapped and unwrapped again and savored.
Anesthetic gas fills the locker, making you pass out. The gas is very effective, but not enough to stop you blinking back into a woken state every now and then, almost teasing you with your disastrous fate. You wake up on the operating table, butt-ass naked, with your hands tied up. 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆 turns on the saw and starts to push you to your end. This is more than just a castration. Luckily, another patient jumps out of nowhere and bashes 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆 in the head, allowing you to break out, put clothes on, for monetization's sake, and limp away as fast as you can. This leads you to a window which you have to jump out of to escape. Even with a clearly broken leg, you can still get up and keep moving. Eventually, at the female ward, you find the doctor to the evacuation route. The door's locked, so you have to go deeper in the female ward and search for the key. Coming to a kitchen, you can find a vent system you can go through to get to the gymnasium. The gymnasium is filled with corpses, all mutilated by 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆. He wants to find the perfect wife, but maybe he isn't fit for love. He thinks therapy made him better. Everything reeks of death, fear, piss and coppery blood meets decomposing to game. When past the gymnasium, you can hear the return of 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆 through his uncomfortably angelic voice echoing through the ward. Swiftly passing 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆 takes you to a wedding room with a corpse dressed as a bride, the key being conveniently placed on the bride's finger. Grabbing the key angers 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆, causing him to enter a fit of rage. She needs to slip through a blocked door and run through the gymnasium to avoid him, almost seeming too easy. Unlocking the door to your freedom gets cut short by 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆, grabbing you, beating you and then hanging you.
One more. I tried, and I tried. You all betrayed me. You can hang like the rest of them. Heavier than you look. If this is you on the honeymoon, I hate to imagine our anniversary.
But the weight of you and 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆's victims on the roof save you, causing 𝗲𝘀𝘀𝘆 to get thrown up and impaled by piping. Ironically, him getting piped down today.
We could have been beautiful.
Walking through the corridors on the way to the exit, a church on fire can be seen in the distance. The reason for the fire can only be assumed to be the works of a pyromaniac, in the naive eyes of Waylon. Heading towards the evacuation point, you can see soldiers covered in blood, leaning over a rat-like corpse. These armed men are clueless. They are as helpless as everyone else. They are dead men walking. Towards the exit, you can find a document from a Helen Garant, from the Murkoff Legal Mitigation Department, speaking on the founder of the Murkoff project, Dr. Rudolf Wernicke, and his secret organised leave from the structural and financial systems at Mount Massive to hide any legal trace of his involvement in the project. Helen mentions the Mitigations Department's excitement for the new project, saying that Project Walrider was a success and due for an expansion into a larger facility with an even greater scale. She insinuates that Wernicke is past his use and has been left out of the main aspect of Project Walrider, and that Wernicke has become too attached to partial successes of patient Billy Hope, saying Wernicke is ignorant to the real discovery at hand. Helen's email to group 8416 is filled with dramatic irony, as conveniently, it's actually Wernicke's work with patient Billy Hope which causes this nightmare. Wernicke's sick Nazi mind was underestimated. He created a god. He finished the project, but maybe, just maybe, we can say Wernicke's success in Project Walrider and the mess it's made is exactly what Murkoff deserves. They won't succeed in their expansion. The morning sun rays gleaming through the corridor windows are rather calming. The disaster you have left behind is almost over. You have the device to end the monstrous corporation in your hand. You are sharing the gospel which Miles failed to share. At the door you can see an injured Jeremy Blair. He still hasn't given up on his dream, as he still attempts to kill you.
No one can know. No one.
But you are saved by the Walrider, making Jeremy meet his violent but deserved end. Covered in blood, with a limp, you come to the final stretch. You see the light glaring down on you. You are the chosen one to survive, and tell the story. The journalist you emailed, however, met a different end. Miles possessed the Walrider and was silenced by Murkoff, failing his job as a journalist. But you, a software engineer, just became the biggest whistleblower in history.
You press that button. There's no going back, Mr. Park. There's enough hard evidence in that video file to make a world of shit for our friends at Murkoff. You got out of Mount Massive alive, and we've done everything in our power to cover your tracks. But our enemies are twitching and malicious corporate paranoiacs with resources you're too moral to imagine. You won't be the only target. Anyone you care about, your wife, your child, there'll be nothing to Murkoff but ways to hurt you. I need you to understand the bridge you're crossing here. You will do irrevocable damage to the company. You might even get close to something like justice. But once you click upload, your life is over. Everyone you love is fucked. But it's the right thing to do. Is hurting Murkoff worth that much to you?